Magic in the booth. I'll keep on talking and you tell me when you can hear me.
Did you unmute it?
Oh, I didn't unmute it? Let's see.
In a Zoom era.
In a Zoom era, I don't know to unmute. So good evening, and welcome to the fourth lecture in the University of Minnesota Center for Jewish Studies 2025-2026 Community Lecture Series. Those of you who don't know me, I don't know why not. I'm Tom Paradise, and I am the director of the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Minnesota. And on behalf of the Minnesota JCC, I also want to welcome you to the Minnesota JCC Capp Center. We very much appreciate the opportunity to partner once again with the JCC as our host for the lecture series this year. The JCC hopes you will discover a broad range of rich programming at the Minnesota JCC, both here at the Capp Center as well as at the Savey Center across the river. I want to thank the staff here at the Minnesota JCC, and especially Katie Klein, Yuri Vinitsky, and Andrea Golden, and of course Jenny the sound booth, for their support in planning for and conducting this event, as well as our community co-sponsors. You ready? The Dath Yeshurun Congregation, Beth Shalom Congregation, Bethel Synagogue, Beth Jacob Congregation, Congregation Darchei Noam, the Encountering Judaism Initiative at the University of St. Thomas, Mayim Rabim Congregation, Mount Zion Temple, Or Emet, Sher Tikva, Temple of Aaron, and Temple Israel. We are also grateful to our university co-sponsors for this lecture. Oops. That was my head. Our university co-sponsors of this lecture, the Department of History and the Department of Sociology, as well as the J. Phillips Center for Interreligious Studies at the University of St. Thomas. And finally, I again give fervent thanks to our outreach coordinator, Mariel Coulter, who continues to keep us, I think functional is the word sometimes. She does so much and makes it look easy, and I am so grateful for her. This lecture is conducted in full acknowledgement that we stand on Minnesota Makoche, the homelands of the Dakota Oyate, within an area that is also the home of the Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk peoples. And this acknowledgement is made in the awareness that while sitting on this land, learning about the ways in which Judaism was reimagined in response to lived experience, it is appropriate to both acknowledge and commit to learning about the past and ongoing experiences of the indigenous peoples of America, and about their efforts to assert their identities and find meaningful sovereignty in their lands. For resources and suggestions about what each of us can do in response to our implicated relationship with the indigenous communities whose land we inhabit, I want to again recommend you visit the website of the Native Governance Center, a Native-led nonprofit dedicated to assisting Native nations in strengthening their governance systems and capacity to exercise sovereignty. You'll find them at nativegov.org. It is in this spirit that we acknowledge that we stand on Minnesota Makoche, the homelands of the Dakota Oyate. 23 years ago, the Center for Jewish Studies established the Community Lecture Series in order to bring to campus and to the local community some of the most exciting researchers from the full range of scholarship in the field of Jewish studies, with the goal of fulfilling the educational mission of the Center for Jewish Studies as broadly as possible. To the regulars in this audience who are maybe tired of hearing this spiel, thank you for putting up with me and for being such amazing, steady supporters and participants. To any first-timers in the room, welcome. What took you so long? And keep on coming. And to those of you watching the recording of this on YouTube at some future date, we appreciate your interest and desire to learn as well. Our series this year is sponsored by the Marvin and Betty Borman Foundation. We are incredibly grateful for their support. And speaking of support, I want to take this opportunity to introduce you all to the Center's development partner, Louis Clark. Louis, give a wave. Louis is the Assistant Dean for Advancement in the College of Liberal Arts. He's been here other times also, and I have to say, unlike some of my colleagues at other institutions who feel like Jewish studies don't get no respect, to allude to a Jewish comedian my students in the Jewish humor class will engage with in a few weeks. Administrators at the U have been very supportive, as evidenced by Louis' repeated presence at our lectures. If you too would like to support the Center's activities, ensuring the growth and vitality of the Center for Jewish Studies, you can talk to Louis after the lecture. And if you're shy, you can also visit our website to make a donation, or you can contact me or speak with me after the lecture. This lecture is part of the Center's investment in the community, and we invite you to invest in us as well. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you our lecture for this evening, Sharon Ann Musher, who will be speaking on Reconstructing Hadassah Kaplan, a daughter's lessons in the struggle for Jewish survival. Dr. Musher is professor of history at Stockton University, where she writes and teaches social, cultural, and oral history with a focus on the New Deal, Jewish women, and motherhood. She also serves on the boards of the Jewish Publication Society and the Living New Deal, which documents, preserves, and maps the New Deal's physical remnants. Dr. Musher earned her PhD in history from Columbia University. She has published articles and reviews in the Journal of American History, American Quarterly, Jewish Quarterly Review, and Jewish Journal of Sociology. She has also written for the Association of American University Professors Academe blog and Times Union, and she has a Times of Israel blog. She is the author of Democratic Art, The New Deal's Influence on American Culture, out with the University of Chicago Press in 2015, and Promised Lands, Hadassah Kaplan and the Legacy of American Jewish Women in Early 20th Century Palestine, published by New York University Press just recently in 2025. A book which draws on the records of her grandmother, the second daughter of Mordecai Kaplan, founder of Reconstructionism, to show how travel to Palestine in the interwar period shaped a cohort of American Jewish women who went on to center Zionism in American Jewish institutions and communities. The Jewish Book Council called it a, quote, compelling and thought-provoking read that sheds light on a remarkable woman and leaves readers with much to ponder about the meaning and potential of inquisitive travel then and now. We had hoped to have a box of copies of her new book for sale, but the storm that blanketed the country last week prevented shipment. But Dr. Musher has generously brought 7 copies, which she is selling at the discounted price of $25, with the proceeds going to the Immigration Law Center of Minnesota. You may purchase them after the lecture, first come, first served. There are also some really cool bookmarks up here, which she's just giving away. So please join me in welcoming Sharon Ann Musher.
I want to thank all those who have helped to make today possible, especially Natan Paradise for a wonderful introduction as well, and Marielle Coulter. I also want to thank today's sponsors, but apparently there are so many more sponsors than I had any idea, and I didn't have a pen and paper when I was sitting there and Natan was going through everybody who needs to be thanked, so I can only thank those that I wrote down, and that includes the University of Minnesota's Department of History, the J. Phillips Center for Interreligious Studies, and the University of St. Thomas, and I'm not even sure that that's right, because I'm not sure that all of those were the same ones that Natan said, but so thank you to everybody who has made today possible and allowed me to come here. I'm honored to visit the Twin Cities for the first time at this moment, to witness what is happening in our collective streets, to learn what it means to treat our neighbors as ourselves, and to see people meeting despair by showing up, making noise, and bringing food, all acts of loving kindness. I believe you have significantly more to teach me about resilience than I you. Nevertheless, it is my privilege to speak to you tonight and to try to offer words of comfort and perhaps even some small inspiration. Historian Daniel Schwartz recently described resilience as based on the interdependence both of tenacity and flexibility. As he explains, the perseverance of resilient people reflects their ability to adapt to adverse and often searing events rather than just rigidly endure them. Resilience today, he continues, signifies not so much a reversion to a previous state or mindset as the creation of a new normal. Tonight, I want us to look at Jewish resilience through the eyes of Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan in addressing the problem of Judaism that plagued the early 20th century. In discussing the nature of that problem and its solutions, I want to introduce you to some central players, to focus on key challenges that were both intellectual and personal. Specifically, I want to consider how Kaplan's understandings of his daughter's worlds shaped his own thinking about Jewish survival. To return to my title, what lessons about the struggle for Jewish survival did his daughters, and especially his second daughter, Hadassah, provide? We will focus on 4 of them, that is, lessons. Finally, I want to reflect on the consequences of Kaplan's thinking and the influence of families and gender on Jewish resilience today. Let's begin with Kaplan himself. Mordecai was a Lithuanian-born, New York-educated rabbi who created an American form of Judaism known as Reconstructionism and a synagogue devoted to promoting that approach, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, known as the SAJ. He was also my great-grandfather. Here I am in the red turtleneck. I don't have a pointer, so you'll just have to look along. In 1978, in Jerusalem, with the man we called Great-Grandpa Mark. He's all the way in the back behind the candles. Next to him is his second wife, the Israeli artist, Rivka Rieger, my grandparents, including my grandma Hadassah, my parents, and my siblings. In 1975, so that's 3 years earlier, as a 94-year-old, Mordecai moved to Israel with Rivka, where they lived for 5 years until his infirmity caused them to return to New York, where 2 of Mordecai's 4 daughters lived. Still, I remember that house in Jerusalem as a magical one, where Rivka painted us as children, and students stopped by frequently to visit and walk with my great-grandfather. You can see my grandma Hadassah in this photo, but I want to show you a few more photos that give you a better sense of my personal connection with her. You might recognize me in all of the photos on this slide, but I'm actually the baby on the far one over. It's my mom, Ruth Musher, who is holding me. She's Hadassah's daughter-in-law. In the photo on the right, I'm holding my now almost 23-year-old daughter, that's the redhead. And in the photo in the top left, my grandma is kissing my youngest daughter, Rachel. Her Hebrew name is Rachel Hadass, named after my grandmother. And this is unusual given that my family is Ashkenazi from German and Eastern European roots, and such Jews usually only name descendants after someone who is no longer living. I think that fact, along with these images, give you a good sense of who she was to me. Now, let's return to Mordecai Kaplan and Reconstructionism. I know that there's a Reconstructionist synagogue here in the Twin Cities, and they're actually a co-sponsor of this event, Mayim Rabim congregation, and I had the pleasure of meeting at dinner tonight Rabbi Sharon Stifel, who is here with us now. So I'm assuming that at least some of you have a connection either with Kaplan or the movement, and I'm always interested in learning more about those connections, so I hope you'll share them with me. Now, just in case you're confused, it was actually Mordecai's son-in-law, Ira Eisenstein, who founded the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in 1968, which is in Wyncote, Pennsylvania, near my home in Philadelphia. I teach at Stockton University. That's in South Jersey, New Jersey, not in California. We've also had that confusion as well. Mordecai himself, though, spent the bulk of his career, some 50 years, teaching homiletics, that's sermon writing, at the conservative movement's Jewish Theological Seminary. He also served as dean of their Teachers Institute, where he trained generations of Jewish teachers within an experiential, student-centered, and communitarian pedagogy that used language, art, music, dance, and literature to shape and sustain Jewish creativity and consciousness. Mordecai is arguably best known for two things. First, he popularized an idea that reflects a space where we're located right now in the JCC, one of two JCCs, I understand, here in the community. He popularized the notion of a shul with a pool, or a shul with a school and a pool, an idea that underlies the Jewish community centers to this day. For example, he was the founding rabbi of the West Side Jewish Center, which is pictured here. He also initiated the bat mitzvah, a ceremony marking a girl's rites of passage and incorporation into the Jewish community as an adult. In 1922, 2 years after ratification of the 19th Amendment, which granted many but not all women the right to vote, and shortly after building a new synagogue, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, Mordecai asked his board to approve his then 12-and-a-half-year-old eldest daughter, Judith, becoming the first bat mitzvah. Since the early 19th century, there had been group confirmations in Italy, France, and Baghdad. But Mordecai instituted this rite of passage as an individual practice. He recognized that girls wanted both social equality and gender equal education, and that they would only pass on Jewish identities to their children if they themselves had the opportunity to develop them and if they found them self-fulfilling. Whoops. I've coupled two images here. On the left, Rabbi and author Sandy Sasso imagined Judith becoming a bat mitzvah in her wonderful picture book, Judy Led the Way. On the right, you see an 82-year-old Judith. This photo was taken in 1992 when Judith had a second bat mitzvah surrounded by feminist Jewish icons, including Betty Friedan, Letty Cotton-Pogreben, and Gloria Steinem. Obviously, they're not actually surrounding her and pictured here, but they were very much present at the event. Strong women surrounded Mordecai for the greater part of his life, from his educated older sister, who arguably first taught him Hebrew, to his wife and 4 daughters, who are pictured here. Thus, it is not surprising that Kaplan imagined women playing a vital role in Reconstructed Judaism. Mordecai married Lena, and they had 4 girls. After the eldest, Judith, the one in the middle with the bow in her hair, came my grandma Hadassah. She's circled in red, and I've written people's names around the side as well. Hadassah had 2 younger sisters, Naomi, and then the baby, Selma. All 4 of them, pictured older here, were bright, educated, beautiful women whom I knew and loved, and who influenced Mordecai's thinking about gender, equality, and a Jewish homeland. Judith, who's in the middle here, was an educator, composer, and a musicologist with a focus on Jewish songs. Beyond becoming the first bat mitzvah, something that had more to do with her father's choices than her own, Judith went on to earn a PhD in musicology during the 1960s when she was in her 50s. Naomi, who's all the way on the left, attended medical school at the American University of Beirut and became a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, and a sculptor. Selma, who's the second on the right next to Hadassah, produced a TV version of Thornton Wilder's Our Town and married entertainment lawyer Saul Jaffe, who represented Frank Sinatra, Duke Ellington, and Grace Kelly, among others. Now, having introduced you to some of the key characters in my talk, I want to return to the crisis of Judaism that Mordecai Kaplan set out to address in the early 20th century and how he imagined resolving it. We're going to call this lesson number 1 in building Jewish resilience. Understand the problem. In his magnus opus, Judaism as a Civilization, Kaplan argued that the challenge American Jews faced was a lack of interest in Jewish life. In the aftermath of the Enlightenment, or Haskalah, Kaplan contended that a number of Jews distanced themselves from the supernatural and Jewish law, or halakha. Rather than viewing salvation as a product of loyalty to the Jewish community and its traditions, leading a person to the world to come, or olam haba, newer ideas focused on salvation in this world through self-expression and creativity. Within that context, why would emancipated Jews, especially those who lived in liberal democracies like the United States, retain their Jewish identity as they embraced a national one? By the early 20th century, many Jews influenced by civic emancipation chose to assimilate into the majority culture. Few who had the freedom to identify as they wished decided to embrace the Jewish traditions they inherited. Assuming that integration and assimilation were possible for American Jews, Kaplan feared the challenges offered by freedom, including conversion, more than those resulting from discrimination. As much as Kaplan's Jewish problem was intellectual, it was also personal. In 1930, at a celebration for his 50th birthday, Mordecai's children perfectly captured their father's frustration with American Jewry in a Gilbert and Sullivan spoof. Impersonating Mordecai, Albert Adelston, who was soon to marry Judith in what would be a short-lived relationship, sang a ditty as if Mordecai were mourning his inability to influence his daughters. Here's how the last couplet went. "But try as I may, I can't compel any one of them referring to his daughters, to worry about Israel." Commenting on such lines, which Mordecai called gems, he wrote in his diary that there was no use in trying to compel his daughters to share his interests and worries. If, he continued in his diary, they cannot manage to lead Jewish lives with some degree of spontaneity and naturalness, if they have to keep on denying themselves legitimate freedom of action, if they have to be forever poignantly and painfully conscious of their Jewishness, what earthly or spiritual benefit can they get out of it? I want my children, he wrote, perhaps most touchingly, to be absolutely and unqualifiedly happy. I don't want them to do anything for my sake, which they would not also do for their own sake. But how could he ensure both his children's happiness and also their desire to live Jewish lives? Kaplan's diary provides a window into his struggles with his daughters. That summer, 1930, even his protege and eldest daughter Judith took music lessons on Saturday morning rather than attending synagogue. Her younger sisters berated their parents for denying them the educational opportunities that fell on the Jewish Sabbath. 2 summers later, Kaplan again recorded in his diary tensions around Sabbath observance. The family was at the Jersey Shore on Long Beach Island, and Kaplan's daughters, as well as Judith's husband, Ira, wanted to drive to the beach on Shabbat afternoon. As Mordecai recounted, for over 2 hours, the family kept up a barrage of argument, under which, he confessed, I finally crumpled up. They demolished my defenses of the customary restrictions on the Sabbath, and incidentally, all those of kashrut. Why am I so downhearted? Mordecai reflected, and you can read along in a typed version of his diary if the print isn't too small, and it probably is too small, so I apologize for that. I think it is due, he writes, to the overwhelming sense of futility that overcomes me whenever I realize how irrelevant all my efforts to reconstruct Judaism are. If I do not succeed in my own home to make Judaism live, if it means so little to my own children, what can I expect of other homes and the children of other people? Kaplan's clearest effort to answer these existential questions about Judaism's contemporary meaning lay in his major work, first published in 1934, Judaism as a Civilization. Here we come to lesson number 2, embrace change. Kaplan's book argued that Judaism was neither a fixed culture nor a religion in which one needed to believe, but instead, and here we return to our central concept of resilience, an evolving civilization to which one belonged. He contended that American Jews should embrace a hyphenated identity, allowing them to take pride in and feel loyalty toward both American and Jewish histories and values. To be concrete, 2 of the ways that Kaplan argued for American Jews, including his daughters, to embrace both their Americanism and their Judaism was through changing gender roles and Zionism. In 1932, Mordecai published an article that brought together both of these ideas. It was called What the American Jewish Woman Can Do for Jewish Education. This piece, which Hadassah originally typed for her father, who didn't type, argued that Zionism and women's organizations provided a vehicle for Jewish women to apply their idealism and maternalist instincts to transform Judaism from obsolete religious and beliefs and practices into a living civilization. Mordecai further contended that emancipation had alienated women more than men, since women rarely received educations. He advocated Zionism and specifically involvement in the organization Hadassah, which he hoped would interest women in the modern struggle for Jewish survival. Working to improve the lives and health of mothers and children in Palestine, regardless of race or creed, Mordecai contended would encourage women to study Hebrew, read Jewish literature, and visit Palestine. According to Mordecai, the ideal of Palestine endows those who come under its influence with the courage to be different, when to be different is in the interest of justice and peace. Such meaningful experiences and knowledge, Mordecai furthermore concluded, would encourage women to seek personal fulfillment in Jewish homes, children, and synagogue attendance, rather than through assimilation, conversion to Christianity, or the pursuit of materialism and upward mobility. Interestingly, very little in Judaism as a Civilization, which he had already written by 1932, but which wouldn't be published for 2 more years, explicitly discussed women. Whereas the rabbi generally used he, him pronouns in Judaism as a Civilization, on his second page, he shifted to she, her, to highlight how American Jewish women had come to view their Judaism as an inescapable misfortune. The number of Jews, wrote Mordecai, who regret they are not Gentile is legion. If I had my choice, he goes on to quote someone he calls a prominent American Jewish woman as saying, I would have asked God to make me a Gentile. But since I had no choice, I pray to him to help me be a good Jewess. You might note here the use of a male pronoun for God. Beyond enumerating the malcontent of American Jewish women, Kaplan criticized Judaism for insufficiently reflecting changed gender roles since women's emancipation. Specifically, he argued that traditional Judaism needed to become equitable religiously and legally to avoid alienating gifted women like his daughters. Toward that end, he criticized what he called the quasi-patriarchal basis of the home, conceptions of property that come from the civil laws of the Code of Jewish Law, known as the Shulchan Aruch, and the more general status of women. In a later piece, following shortly after Judith's divorce from Al and remarriage to Ira, he highlighted the need to change discriminatory Jewish laws which required men to grant women a get, religious divorce, before they might remarry and have Jewish legitimate children. Kaplan, however, understood that such changes could not be imposed from top down, but rather needed to come from the demands of women themselves. Judith was among those women who would have made such ultimatums. From an early age, Mordecai's expectations of her were exceedingly high. Judith challenged her father, and he treated her as if she were an eldest son. Before she became a bat mitzvah, she recalled having decided that she did not believe in God. Okay, we're talking about before 13 here. I thought, she explained, this was really calamitous, but I faced him with it, expecting the heaven to fall. All he did was question me and say, God? For Judith, that conversation signaled that they could talk about anything. By the time she was 15, Judith ran her summer camp's musical program. She also continued to read Torah at camp, even when women were not allowed to do so after they became bat mitzvah at her father's synagogue. They wouldn't be allowed to do so until the 1950s. Judith further pursued a BA and then an MA at her father's Teachers Institute and Columbia University's Teachers College. She taught at Teachers Institute for almost 30 years, only leaving to go to Chicago for her husband's job. Whereas Judith's professional trajectory was evident from early on, my grandmother's was not as clear. Hadassah sought her parents' approval, but was significantly less interested in school and intellectual debate with her father than her older sister. I couldn't argue with him, Hadassah retrospectively recalled of her father. I wasn't interested in those things. Instead, she was driven by more typical teenage pursuits, friends, sports, and boys. Hadassah was also strikingly beautiful, a blue-eyed brunette with a dazzling smile whose exuberance was magnetic. Although she was the daughter of immigrants, she was a born and bred New Yorker with an easily discernible accent. She was an athlete, a social dancer, a lover of theater, art, music, and movies, and an extrovert. She was also a letter writer, a keeper of diaries, and an archivist of family records. Like many young Jewish women of her generation, Hadassah wanted to be a teacher. When she was 15 and a half, she entered Hunter College, a public college known as the Jewish Girls Radcliffe, the female counterpart to Harvard University. 3 years later, Hadassah graduated with a bachelor's degree and a teacher's certificate. Shortly before beginning her second year of teaching in the middle of August 1932, her supervisor informed her that the school would not rehire her. Hadassah's prospects for finding work as a teacher or otherwise were incredibly slim. She had three strikes against her as a young Jewish woman. For the next 2 years, school officials banned all new hiring. They also furloughed teachers, slashed wages, instituted loyalty oaths, and spread out the remaining work among substitute teachers, with priority given to unemployed men over the plethora of trained women. Here we come to lesson number 3 in Jewish resilience: encourage travel. Without a job or a life partner, Hadassah decided that it would be a grand thing to go to Palestine. Her cousins, Dorothy and Naomi Rubin, laughed at her. Nevertheless, she recalled her parents similarly resolving during Sabbath walk that she should spend the year abroad. Over the next 10 days, Hadassah bought a one-way ticket, found chaperones, a travel companion, packed a bag, and boarded the Execorta, bound for Jaffa. Here, her parents are saying goodbye to her on the ship. Hadassah spent 9 months living in Jerusalem, studying Hebrew and traveling through mandatory Palestine, and then 2 months in the summer of 1933, returning through the Middle East and interwar Europe. She documented her experiences in letters, diaries, and meticulously labeled photos that are at the heart of my recent book, Promised Lands, Hadassah Kaplan, and the Legacy of American Jewish Women in Early 20th Century Palestine. Before the founding of the State of Israel, Zionism was a minority position. Reform Jews embraced the United States as Zion. Most Orthodox condemned Zionism as a human attempt to hasten the Messiah. Socialists saw it as materialistic, and Yiddishists viewed it as anti-diasporic. For the minority of people, like the Kaplans, who identified with the Jewish homeland before 1948, Zionism meant a range of different things. Some, both Jews and Christians, were drawn to the notion of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Others advocated for one elsewhere, such as Uganda or even Galveston, Texas. Those who were influenced by the Austrian journalist and organizer Theodor Herzl, pictured here, saw a Jewish state as a political solution to the Jewish problem, meaning anti-Semitism. Ongoing persecution was evident in pogroms, organized mass violence targeting Jewish men, women, and children that began in the 1880s. In a nationalist era, Zionism appeared to offer Jews a redemptive narrative of emancipation. Political Zionists rejected the diaspora, exile, and victimization for newly liberated Jewish culture, society, and selves. More than Herzl, however, Mordecai was inspired by Echad Ha'am's notion of cultural Zionism. For Mordecai, a Jewish homeland would combat the problem of Judaism, defined as assimilation rather than anti-Semitism, while facilitating the evolution of Jewish civilization by offering an essential source of cultural, ethical, and religious values. Kaplan promoted a Zionism grounded in democracy, religious pluralism, minority rights, and a separation of church and state. He further believed that a Jewish homeland could serve as a moral force for world Jewry. Rather than reinforcing orthodoxy, he hoped it would forge what he considered a new and creative Judaism. Such a homeland, Mordecai insisted, would have the potential to create ethical beings and inspire self-realization not only where it was located, but also throughout the diaspora. According to his biographer Mel Skult, Mordecai was so devoted to Zionism that he nearly called his approach Zionist Judaism rather than Reconstructionism. At the same time, Kaplan was wary of Jewish and other forms of nationalism. He warned against the dangers of imperialism and ethno and racial nationalism and embraced binationalism in the 1930s. As early as 1929, he confided in his diary about the demographic reality that made the possibility of a Jewish homeland in Palestine unrealistic, and simultaneously about the importance of creating an Arab homeland in Palestine alongside a Jewish one. Kaplan did not imagine that all Jews would move to Palestine, nor that such a land would be exclusively Jewish. Instead, he embraced a concept of Jewish diasporic peoplehood that brought together diverse people across religious, linguistic, cultural, racial, and ethnic boundaries within a pluralistic transnational community that preserved minority self-determination. He hoped that Jews would use their minority status in pluralistic lands, such as the United States and Palestine, to affirm the rights of all. By the time Hadassah found herself single and unemployed in the summer of 1932, she had already spent considerable formative time having been taught and influenced by a cohort of educators trained by her father. For this group, spending time in Palestine served as a formative experience, essential for every Jew, rather than a luxury. As the daughter of a prominent rabbi with the means to travel abroad, even in the midst of the Depression, Hadassah was clearly unusual. Nevertheless, change in the travel industry made touring markedly more plausible, even for immigrants and members of the working class. And here you can see two brochures advertising such travels. Tourism targeting Jews further swelled travel to Palestine. Package tours devoted special attention to the Jewish colonies in Palestine, and Zionist organizations established contests and offered free trips to reward volunteers for their fundraising. Think of precursors to Birthright. In 1924, 70,000 Western tourists traveled to Palestine. Because of the Great Depression, that number was cut nearly in half 6 years later to 40,000. Yet commentators remained amazed by how many Americans made the journey. Scholars have long commented on the role that travel played in liberating women from domestic obligations, heightening their agency, enhancing their control over time and money, and developing their writing voices. Shortly before Hadassah's travels, in the spring and summer of 1932, Rebecca Aronson Brickner, a Cleveland Jewish educator and a founding member of the Hadassah organization, journeyed to Palestine. A middle-class Jewish wife traveling elsewhere at the time without her husband, in this case a Reform rabbi, but with her children, might have seemed inappropriate. Brickner, however, could remain a so-called good wife while simultaneously pursuing her own interests in Palestine, working on her Hebrew, and studying Jewish history and modern Hebrew literature at Hebrew University. Women like Brickner found travel to Palestine liberating. "I feel that this trip has already done so much for me," she recalled. "It has opened new vistas for me and lifted me out of the rut I was falling into." Although few of these travelers permanently settled in Palestine, many of them, like Brickner and Hadassah, would infuse active learning of Hebrew culture and nationalism into Hebrew schools, Talmud Torahs, suburban synagogue schools, children's literature, camps, youth groups, adult education, and cultural and art programs in the United States. Despite his concerns about the potential chauvinism of Jewish nationalism, Mordecai continued to see Zionism's potential. As a father, Mordecai felt his own shortcomings in not being able to persuade even his own family of the beauty and meaning in Judaism. He hoped that Palestine and Zionism might reconstruct Judaism and educate, inspire, and provide professional and personal opportunities for American Jewish women, and particularly for his somewhat rebellious second daughter, Hadassah. Moreover, the Kaplans believed that training with their friends, who were educators and reformers in Palestine, would prepare their daughter, Hadassah, to teach in the Jewish world and or to join the ranks of Jewish female activists, particularly those engaged in the upbuilding of Jewish culture in Palestine and the United States. Hadassah's mother, Lena, repeatedly admonished her daughter to cleave to her chaperones. Such women included those pictured here: Ruth Gell Jacobs, Bertha Schoolman, Julia Aronson Dushkin, and Libby Suckoff-Berkson. These were Mordecai's students or their wives, and counted among them Jewish educators and reformers and presidents of the organization Hadassah. If their daughter Hadassah spent time among the idealistic Hadassah reformers and Jewish educators whom the Kaplans had long known, trusted, and trained, they hoped she might find a purposeful way to contribute to Jewish renewal. Now, whatever her parents' visions of travel were, in Hadassah's photos, letters, and journal entries, we see evidence that she and her peers pushed prescribed boundaries during their journey. On the left, we see Hadassah with Reba Isaacson, her friend from the SAJ, Camp Moden, and Hunter College. Although the young women were chaperoned, they relatively quickly constituted a foursome with two non-Jewish men. According to Hadassah's diary, however, and not described in her letters home to Mama and Papa, her ship encounter that became more intimate was actually with another non-Jewish man, this time a married Scottish father of two. You have to read the book to hear more about that one. Now, perhaps with just cause, Lena was quite concerned about her daughter. Anxiety was at the forefront of the correspondence between mother and daughter. And I'll just say as an aside, my eldest daughter was doing a gap year during COVID, toward the end of COVID, at the time that I was writing this book, and I very much had Lena sitting on my shoulder as a model of probably the way that I should not speak to my daughter during this gap year. Lena constantly agonized over whether Hadassah was seeing the right Israel and connecting with the appropriate people, and you can hear it in her own voice from her letters. "I am not so much worried," Lena wrote, "but annoyed at your mode of life since you left home. When you were here, you said that you were fed up with nightclubs and dancing, etc., etc. And here you are, whether at Marseille, Alexandria, Cairo, or Jerusalem. You are doing the same thing all over again. Really, dearie, I thought you ran away from that. Do be a sensible girl and settle down and see the land of Israel. Get all the spirit and education you can. You will have plenty of nightclubs and dances when you get back home. Don't be the social butterfly. Try to be a little of a chalutzot," meaning a pioneer. I wouldn't want you to be that altogether either, but combine everything if possible. For her part, Hadassah truly tried to be a good daughter. In letters, she assured her mother that she was well taken care of all the time, that she regularly consulted with her mentors and acted with their approval. With her chaperone's guidance, Hadassah settled in a rented room in a family's home in Jerusalem. She enrolled at Hebrew University, but then when she realized the classes were too advanced, she switched to studying Hebrew language and Bible with tutors several days a week. She also traveled extensively, spending significant time in Tel Aviv and pictured here working on kibbutzim. In addition, she visited Petra with biblical archaeologists from Hebrew University and on the right, spent time with friends on a boathouse on the Nile and in Cairo. Hadassah's status as Mordecai's daughter permitted her audiences with some of Palestine's leading figures. She visits, for example, with founder of the Hadassah organization, Henrietta Zold, the Zionist educator Jesse Samter, and Reform rabbi and president of Hebrew University, Judah Magnus. In fact, she elicits Zold and Samter's advice to answer a question her father asked her. Should he settle in Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, as he called it? Hadassah and Mordecai have this really wonderful exchange in Hebrew about this, which I relay in the book. They wrote to one another in Hebrew. She writes to her parents, to her mother and her sisters in English, and they write back to her in English. In this correspondence, Mordecai painfully described his struggles in the United States to his daughter when asking her if he should settle there. He writes, "Despite the large number of Jews here, I am like a juniper in the desert due to the wide distance between my views and aspirations and the views and aspirations of those with whom I interact at the various institutions at which I invest all my energy." Hadassah responds in this wonderful way. It really shows intergenerational differences. She basically tells him that he and Mama should move because they would be happier there. This is her voice. She says, "I know that our life philosophies do not agree because I am certain that all knowledge and work are necessary for someone only in order to make him happy. And what do you think?" I'm not going to read the rest of it. You have it up here. But she basically says, "Papa, you've done a lot of work to save the world, and it's left you feeling, sort of dejected by this. And I have this different philosophy about happiness. I think maybe you should come here." But still, she follows up on her mission and asks Henrietta Zold and Jesse Samter. They disagree. They think he's doing very important work in the United States and absolutely should not leave. And she proceeds to report all of this to her father. Like Mordecai, Hadassah questioned if she should remain in Palestine or return to New York. And here we come to lesson number 4, allow your children to become themselves. And I know we have some children in the room, so I'll put that out there. I think my children were happy that I said, "You like lesson number 4 that I'm saying." Mordecai's response to Hadassah's question as to what she should do is particularly poignant. He writes, "Let me speak to you as a father to his child. You are the one to decide your future." And remember, he's writing this to a 20-year-old in 1933. "In deciding the chief consideration, outside of the personality of the man you would care for," of course there's still gender playing into these assumptions, "is which country holds out to you greater possibility of personal development and self-realization, Palestine or America." The part that I love about this letter is Mordecai applying his ideas of personal salvation even to his conversation with his 20-year-old daughter. Hadassah eventually determines that she should return home, which she did, traveling more or less unchaperoned through Europe in the summer of 1933, encountering growing anti-Semitism. Although Hadassah would live another 81 years, the informal education she acquired during her year traveling and studying in Palestine as a 19-year-old was formative in turning her into the sophisticated American Jewish woman she would become. Retrospectively, Hadassah referred to her life abroad as the year of her life. By eluding chaperones and living at a distance from her parents, Hadassah was able to experiment in ways that might otherwise have been unavailable to her. She gained insight into the lives of a range of single and married women beyond her sisters and mother. They offered diverse models as to how one might arrange, maintain, and sometimes eschew marriage. She furthermore saw examples of mothering while still pursuing one's own personal, professional, and intellectual interests. Hadassah, pictured here on the right with the family, never became a political leader, a feminist activist, a major Jewish thinker, or even a president of a local chapter of the American Women's Zionist organization, Hadassah. Instead, like many American Jewish women who spent time in Palestine, she eventually returned to the US, where she taught and married. Like a number of women of her generation with the means to do so, Hadassah focused on her family. At the same time, she brought much of what she had learned in Palestine, her Hebrew, travel savviness, and commitment to building a Jewish civilization, to her teaching, volunteer work, and lay leadership. She served her father's synagogue, the SAJ, headed up the PTO, organized auctions of Israeli artwork and speaker series, including an event with Eleanor Roosevelt, who was then delegate to the United Nations. She also aided her husband, Sidney Musher, in his charitable work for the Palestine Endowment Fund, connecting donors with specific institutions and needs in Israel. They traveled to Israel annually for years as part of this philanthropic work. In fact, at the end of Hadassah's life, she suffered from dementia. At one point, for about 3 weeks, she switched only to speaking in Hebrew, although her caretaker didn't understand a word. Drawing on her love of learning, language, and the arts and what is sometimes dismissed as women's work, Hadassah's story provides insight into how American Jewish institutions and communities came to center Israel. She and her peers forged an American Judaism that would become increasingly recognizable in the aftermath of World War II, one connecting American Jews with Israel through volunteer work, fundraising, and the arts. Whereas Mordecai saw women's active participation in Jewish life and Zionism as vital ingredients for Jewish resilience, the bond between American Jewish women and Israel today has become significantly more tenuous. A nation and ideology that once largely united Jews in Israel and the diaspora now increasingly fragments them. Within that context, I offer Mordecai's vision of ethical nationhood and the creative efforts of a generation of women to implement it as a model of Jewish resilience. Recovering the dreams of an adventurous daughter, an overprotective mother, a visionary father, and a cohort of female teachers and social workers helps to illustrate what Palestine and later Israel meant for American Jews in the early to mid 20th century. Many of them conceived of a Jewish homeland not based on military might and expansion, but rather on a search for personal fulfillment and communal engagement, opportunities to learn, and a chance to participate in significant labor when few other such opportunities existed. As our current era of rising authoritarianism and violence undermines efforts to create shared democratic societies, remembering an earlier generation's dreams and lacunae might reveal roads not taken and help to forge future directions. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Okay, you know the drill.
And I'm just going to say I made the mistake of not having my timer with me, and I realized I probably went slower than I should. So if I went too, I apologize. I'm happy to take questions.
That's great. Okay, who wants to go first? Come on, nobody's shy. Okay.
So as you said at the end, the relationship between Jews and the United States.
Hold the mic to your mouth.
And the United States is different now than it was then. And I think that we're really challenged by exactly what the relationship should be and can be, and how we adjust to what is the reality now. You know, how would your father respond? How would you respond?
Yeah, so I agree very much, and it's one of the reasons why I want to bring up Mordecai Kaplan's vision of ethical nationhood. We are obviously in a very difficult period right now. It's hard for me to say how Mordecai Kaplan would respond. I mean, what I've tried to do in my talk is to outline what his position was. I mean, he was thinking about a Palestinian state from a very early stage. He was focused on Palestine as a way of building ethical personhood, ethical state. And we obviously have come to a much more complicated place. I mean, I could prognosticate much more. I think you would be very angry at Bibi, very unhappy with the current situation, concerned about anti-Semitism. There are many different things that I could make up, but as a historian, I work with the texts that I have, and I have chosen to focus on particular people to lift up the kinds of visions that they had. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Shosh Dworsky. I'm a rabbi now, and I'm 70 years old. I just want the context. Mm-hmm. But I would say in the 80s. Mm-hmm. I'm just so delighted to meet Hadassah because I lived in Israel for quite a period then, and I learned a great Hebrew, and I learned a lot, and I was also a little bit of a wild child. Mm-hmm. And some of those pictures of her, I really relate to, and also the mother saying, is this really what you should be doing right now? And my mother's not here to be able to respond to that, but I've just never had sort of that part of my life told, and it's so kind of inspiring and affirming, so I just want to thank you.
Thank you. I have a card up here. I hope you'll come and take it. So I started thinking about this book a long time ago. I started thinking about it when I was applying to graduate schools. It was in 1994, and I actually wrote, I was in England at the time, and I wrote a master's thesis on British women who immigrated to Israel between 1965 and 1975, and I looked at their assimilation process and their motivations for migrating and their assimilation process. And that cohort, I interviewed 30 women, including 5 who returned to Great Britain, and that cohort is maybe closer to your own, and so you might find in all my writing I bring in the voices of the sources and the people that I work with. The letters, the diaries are in my book, and those interviews are in that article too. I'd be happy to send it to you.
Writing a book about anyone means you get to know them a lot. Sometimes in ways you perhaps don't want to when they're, say, a close family member. How has it been balancing sort of the duties of a historian to record, even the tough parts of your subject, with the fact that this was someone you grew up with and have very deep personal attachment to?
This is a wonderful question. I really love it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about that. I really adored my grandma. I think that came through in the photos. We had a really close relationship, and it was such that, because people have asked a version of that question before, were there things that you were worried about writing? There are always politics in writing, especially in writing a family history. But the politics were, I think, more around how would other family members receive this. So I began thinking about the book in 1994. I began kind of more actively conceiving it after she passed away, and I inherited her archive. And the book, I open at her Shiva call. I was rustling through her desk, looking at her papers, and I found a mail order catalog, and inside it, between the bras and the sweatshirts, was a letter that my great-grandfather had written 100 years ago when he gave an address at the opening of Hebrew University. And I thought, oh my goodness, I thought this letter was at JTS or at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. What is it doing sitting in the, it wasn't Land's End, it was whatever the equivalent of that was. I thought, what is it doing sitting here, and what other gems are here? I guess I fundamentally, there are two different things. One is, I wasn't worried about writing some things that I knew, about the affair on the boat. I knew that there might be some members of my family that would not be thrilled with me writing about this kind of thing. But I thought at the end of the day, knowing my grandma, she sort of would have laughed it off. She would have told me it was inappropriate, dear, but she would have laughed it off. She wouldn't have really been angry with me about it. There were other parts that were harder to write about. There were her attitudes towards. I tried to understand what she saw and what she didn't see, particularly in terms of Arabs. I saw her being pretty much a product of her time and of her class in terms of how she saw people. And there were times where I would have wished that she would have seen things differently, written about things differently, but I felt the responsibility of a historian. I was looking at this work not just to do some kind of family nostalgia, but to recreate the world and understand, get a better sense of, in a way, how we've come to where we are today, and are there any lessons in it? So I thought it was important. And there were things, I didn't have as intimate a relationship with my great-grandfather, but he says some things that I found really offensive in the diary, and I insisted on putting them in, and I've insisted on putting them in lectures. I didn't put them in this one because I was working on the 4 lessons, so it didn't fit in the same kind of way. I'm a historian, so I had the evidence. I treated it as the evidence. I tried to look outside of the archive that I inherited to figure out what stories am I missing. Where does this fit into a wider historiography, the wider debates, and I hope I was able to do justice to both.
Thank you. Hi, that was a wonderful talk. Thank you for being here. Really, it was amazing to hear. I am the same age that Hadassah was when she left for Palestine. And while things have changed since then, there are also lots that haven't. And I'm wondering, as a young Jew, what are your suggestions going forward? How can I come to terms with that complexity living in this world as a Jew going forward to raise more generations?
Wow, what a huge question. I aspire to have a good answer to it. I hope that you can find community, whether it's here at JCC or nationally or internationally, wherever you need to go to find it. I think we're in a very different time, but there were, to me, some resonances when I was reading about my grandmother and that generation in the midst of the Great Depression. Again, it was in the middle of COVID. So I was thinking about all these restrictions on people, and I think about it as I teach a younger generation who's struggling to come into their own. There are so many things that I hope for you and your generation, but I think finding ways to connect Jewishly with community. I don't have any real answers for that. I hope that and I know that there are real challenges in current institutions and in bringing young people into them. But I do think that there are some models around Shabbat tables, bringing people together, bringing people into conversation and learning. I hope you can find models for learning and through reading.
Thank you for an amazing lecture and for sharing this really powerful personal story and archive with us from your grandmother. I'd like to, again, focus on that relationship in my question and ask, what are the main lessons of your grandmother and her generation, her sisters and others, that you took in your life as a Jewish woman and your own experience figuring out how to, be a Jewish adult and a Jewish woman in this generation?
They were incredibly strong women. They fought with each other. They were very funny when they were in the room together, all arguing with one another. I learned a lot from their strength. I learned a lot, even just describing the kinds of careers that they pursued, their interests. These were people who went past many obstacles that slowed down a lot of other people. And I admire that. And at the same time, nobody's perfect. They had their flaws, and I try not to describe particularly Hadassah, who I really focus on, as a flawless person. She had flaws, she had anxiety, she writes about her own anxiety. She keeps writing home. When she decides she's gonna go home, she says, don't judge me too much. I haven't changed that much. I know you're gonna think that I'm this new person, but I'm really not. Please don't judge me. So they're all human. I think, to me, reading, whether it's the primary sources, the letters, or reading other kinds of texts, novels, it's a way to see into somebody else's world and life and to imagine other kinds of possibilities.
Thank you so much for a really engaging experience. I'm thinking about Hadassah from the standpoint of growing up also as I was one of 3 girls in my family, and the attitudes that my parents had because there were no boys. And I wonder about whether, I'm sure you thought about what Hadassah's life might have been like if there were boys in the home, or what it would have been like for Mordecai if he had a boy in the home, and how that might have changed things. Do you have
Yeah, I think it would have changed things. I think he treated Judith like an oldest son. If she had actually been an oldest son, I don't know if he would have so quickly gotten around to creating the institution of a bat mitzvah, if that would have moved forward in the same kind of way. He was deeply engaged with Judith, and that shaped that kind of direction. I think the fact that she was divorced, that she was reading Torah, that she was studying, that she was so musically inclined. I think that engaged him with a world of thinking about, wait, I have these 4 young women, and what kinds of lives will they go on to live? What kinds of opportunities will they have? That's really why I find it so poignant, at the beach, and even Ira, who is male and who's his disciple, is saying, come on, Dad, can't we drive to the beach? It's enough already. I don't, how do you create something meaningful? So I think if Judith had been a son, I think it would have been a different thing. But who knows? This is prognostication. Yeah.
I just want to say for the record that my wife Barb asked exactly the question I was thinking about.
Oh,
We've got time for one more question.
I particularly enjoyed the way you changed your voice when you were being different people. You gave a very lively picture. And I was very, I have to say, shocked when you said that women could only read the Torah at their bat mitzvah, and after at SHA, they didn't. Now that dashed an idea I had of your great-grandfather. How did that happen?
I don't actually know the answer to the question of how did that happen. I know the answer to how did that unhappen. Meaning the norm was that women were not reading from Torah. Then they became bat mitzvah, and they got to have an aliyah and read Torah when they did that. And then they didn't do it again. And it changes in the 1950s. It actually changes when Ira Eisenstein is the assistant rabbi. It's under Ira's auspices that it changes. And it changes when his daughter, Miriam, becomes bat mitzvah, and it changes at that point, and it's at that point that Lena actually has her first aliyah. So we could call that the first adult bat mitzvah. So the change, I think it goes along with the story of change doesn't happen from the top down, it happens from the bottom up. So there was an upswelling of young women who had studied and trained to become bat mitzvah, who continued doing it when they were at camp, and they wanted to continue doing it. And when they made enough noise, that was when the change began to happen.
Thank you very much for a very engaging talk.
Thank you. You've been a terrific audience. Thank you so much.
If you would like to learn more from Dr. Musher, please join us on campus tomorrow at noon to hear her speak about Exploding the Canon, Building Inclusive American Jewish Intellectual Traditions. You can find more details about the lecture on our website, and as always, lunch will be provided. Our next community lecture will be on Tuesday, March 17th, back across the river at the Sabies J60 Center. Come here, Devin Nar, Chair of Sephardic Studies at the University of Washington. He'll be presenting A Jewish Language for All Occasions, Ladino Culture and Its Innovations. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Musher, and there are 7 books for sale.
And like any good bat mitzvah, I have swag. So even if you don't want a book, I have bookmarks. Help yourself.